welcome to this Printers Plan tutorial video on how to set up cutting services in Printers Plan. So starting off, we'll go to our Services tab in Printers Plan, and we'll need to locate where we want to create this service. So I have a finishing department with a cutting category in here, so I'll click Cut, and then I'm going to click New to create a new service from scratch. If I have an existing service, sometimes it's easier to just copy and then paste and update the key fields, but since for this demonstration we're going over everything top to bottom, I'm going to start at the top in the general properties and I'm going to give it a name, and I'm just going to call it cutting service. Then I need to go over to the right and assign a sales department, where in my system I have a finishing sales department that I'll assign there. I don't need to enter in an invoice name or use the reminder or note fields up here, although I can if I choose to. Down here in the pricing properties section, the quantity field is unlocked, so we can use this drop down to choose what we want this service to output as. It's defaulted to item quantity, but we don't want that. We want to change that to run size sheets no waste or run size sheets with waste, depending on how we want waste to calculate here. So I'm going to put this as with waste, and then we'll assume that this is going to be a wasteful service. And then we're going to use these fields below the quantity drop down to alter that quantity output, where right now we have just run size sheets, and we need to convert that into lifts, and then we need to decide how many cuts per lift, because we want this service to track cuts per lift, not sheets or lifts. So in this divide by field here, I'm going to check the sheets of 20-pound bond checkbox, which will allow this service to use the paper's caliper that we enter on each material service to determine how many sheets of that material can fit into a single lift for cutting. And then we just need to, in this field for divide by, put in the maximum amount of sheets that we can fit into a lift while cutting. So I'll say 500 here for this example. So that's giving us lifts as our output now, and now we need to change that to cuts per lift. And we'll do that by using the multiply by field below that as well. So we're using both of these. In this or ask how many field here, I'll leave the multiply by field blank, and I'll go over to this field and I'll type in cuts per sheet. So this will ask us, when we use this service, how many cuts per sheet, and it'll take the numbers and it'll adjust per each cut. So now we need to determine the waste, the cost, and the price. So starting at the waste, if we want this to be a wasteful service, we can add additional paper waste, and we can say this needs, a certain amount of setup sheets or maybe a certain percent of the run quantity. I'll just put in one setup sheet here. Going down to the cost area, this will typically be time cost only, and then we'll just have a budgeted hourly rate or a burden rate for this machine, and I'll just put in 80 there. So now at this point we'll actually jump off to the right and we'll look at our setup and run table, where we can add setup time. We don't need to. We can just jump down to the run table to establish the rate for this. So in the run table, in the units per hour field, our units is always based on whatever we have our quantity outputting. In this case, we have our quantity being altered to output cuts per lift. So this will be how many cuts per lift per hour. So I'll go ahead and just put 48 in there, just as an example. And then I can move back over to the price field on the left and establish my specific pricing here, where this one is fairly straightforward and I have some flexibility for how I can do pricing. Right now it's just set to cost plus markup, where it's going to take that time cost. After it establishes how many lifts it needs and how many cuts it needs, it'll give you a time and then base its pricing on a marked up cost. If I want to move away from that, I can. I have all these standard options here. Using price column of setup and run table will allow you to inject specific numbers into the run price field, which will then use the material cost and run prices are field here to decide how you're establishing your pricing. Is this your pricing per each, per thousand, or your total pricing at that quantity break? So if you need to use more complex pricing than that, then you can use the price table option, which unlocks the price table on the left. And we have a comprehensive video on how to use and set up price tables. If you'd like more information on that, you can reference that video and that will answer your questions. So once we have that set up here, we just need to make sure we're filling in the rest of the common fields. If we're using cost plus markup, we'll need to establish either a fixed markup or a variable markup on the markup table. And I'll just use 20% for this, just as an example. So now I can just save and close this service and go test it. I don't need to do anything else here. And when I do test it, it'll ask me how many cuts per sheet, and I'll have to enter in how many cuts I need on this lift, And then I'll be looking for that time to be correct before I start adjusting my cost and my pricing, because most of the time your costs are going to be based on your pricing. And if your price model is cost plus markup, that time is going to be crucial. If you have any further questions on anything, you can check our knowledge base, support.premix.com, for more information, or you can reach out to our support team, support@premix.com. Thank you for watching.